Before you hear my story, take a breath. What you're about to listen to isn't just about betrayal. It's about the slow death of trust, the weight of silence, and the moment a woman decides she will never beg to be seen again. Every detail you'll hear was carved out of years of sacrifice and love that turned into something unrecognizable. So if you've ever given everything to someone who only gave you lies in return, stay with me. This isn't just revenge, it's awakening. I could hear her laugh before I saw her face. It was high, careless, the kind of laugh that once belonged to me. Recife, August 2024. The humidity clung to the glass walls of the cafe, and the air smelled of rain and roasted coffee beans. I had been there for an hour already, sitting 2 tables away from the window, pretending to read an old newspaper with trembling hands. The metal spoon in my cup had gone cold long ago, but I kept stirring, letting the soft clink fill the silence that lived in my chest. Outside, the bench waited, white, curved, and deceptively innocent. I had chosen that bench because I knew it better than she ever would. For days I had walked past it, testing its strength, watching how it glistened after the rain, how people sat there without a second thought. It was the perfect place for someone too confident to see a trap when it smiled back at her. She entered the cafe as if she owned the air inside it. Her perfume arrived before she did, a heavy sweetness that reminded me of the nights he came home late, with that same scent buried in the collar of his shirt. Her hair was the shade of honey I used to dye mine to please him. Her dress was white, soft, the kind of fabric that stains easily, and I wondered if she had ever scrubbed blood or grease from anything in her life. I watched her glide to the counter, greet the barista by name, and place her order with a familiarity that pierced me. That was my husband's favorite spot, his favorite cup, his favorite woman now. I had memorized her voice from the recordings I found on his phone. She laughed differently when she spoke to him. Her voice dropped half a tone, like velvet soaked in guilt. I didn't blink when she walked toward the bench. The rain had stopped, leaving tiny mirrors on the cobblestones outside. She hesitated for a second, looking around, probably expecting him. He was never on time for me, but for her, he would have driven through fire. I imagined him parking nearby, adjusting his hair, smiling at his reflection before stepping out. My pulse tightened. I remembered how years ago I used to wait like that, smiling, believing he was late because of traffic. Not another woman's perfume. My hands itched against the paper. The ink had transferred faintly onto my fingers, smudging like a small bruise. I rubbed it off, but it clung stubbornly. Everything does in the end. Ink, betrayal, memories. She finally sat down. I could see the faint flicker of discomfort cross her face, but she ignored it. I had made sure the mixture on that bench was colorless, odorless, and merciless. It wasn't dangerous. I'm not a murderer. Just something to hold her still, long enough for the world to see her the way I had seen myself for years. Trapped, helpless, ridiculous. She crossed her legs, pulled out her phone, and smiled at her reflection in the screen. I watched her thumb glide across the glass, waiting for his name to appear. And then I saw it. The text she typed, her face glowing in the blue light. "I'm here, baby. Same place. Miss you already." My stomach twisted. I had read those words before, almost word for word, in messages sent to me when we first met. His patterns never changed, only the name. I remembered our first year together. 2007. The sea, the smell of coconut oil, the way he promised forever with his hand on my thigh. We were poor but wild, living in a one-room apartment with a broken fan and dreams too big for our walls. He said I was his anchor. He said no one could ever take my place. Funny how anchors end up at the bottom of things. I gave him everything. The best years, my youth, my loyalty, my silence. When he started staying late at work, I cooked dinner and waited. When he grew distant, I told myself love changed, that routine had dulled what was once bright. When I found lipstick on his collar last December, I blamed the laundry. That's what love does. It gives you excuses instead of answers. Now, watching her struggle subtly, shifting on the bench, my chest filled with something heavy. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just the weight of justice arriving too late. She pressed her hands down, tried to stand, failed. Panic flashed in her eyes. She looked around, realizing she was being watched. People started whispering. The cafe fell into that strange kind of silence that exists between curiosity and fear. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. I saw in her expression the same disbelief I once carried when he told me he needed space. She was learning now that comfort can turn into captivity in a heartbeat. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was bitter, overbrewed, perfect. I had rehearsed this scene so many times that it almost felt theatrical. Yet now that it was real, it didn't bring the relief I expected. The truth is, revenge never tastes like victory. It tastes like cold metal and sleepless nights. As I watched her tremble, I thought of the nights I stayed awake beside him, pretending to be asleep while he texted under the blanket, his phone lighting up his face like a secret sunrise. I thought of the day I saw the receipt from this very cafe in his wallet, the small smudge of her lipstick on the edge. I thought of how my hands shook when I realized I wasn't paranoid. I was right. She began calling his name softly, then louder. "Lucas! Lucas! Please!" The sound hit me like a slap. I had not heard her speak his name aloud before. It felt foreign, stolen. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, walking toward the door with slow, steady steps. People turned to look at me, their eyes sliding from her panic to my calm. I didn't look back. The sound of her voice followed me out, rising, cracking, until it drowned in the noise of the street. The bench gleamed under the gray sky, holding its secret. When I reached the corner, I finally exhaled. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and diesel, and something clean, almost new. My hands were trembling, but my mind was quiet for the first time in years. Behind me, she was still calling his name. Ahead of me, the city stretched open and wide. I had just learned that freedom sometimes arrives disguised as a sin. The night after the trap, I couldn't sleep. The image of her face, half shock, half disbelief, lingered behind my eyelids like an afterimage burned into the skin of my memory. But instead of satisfaction, what filled me was an old ache, one that had lived quietly beneath my ribs for years. You don't reach that kind of cold revenge overnight. It's carved slowly, in silence, over long years of devotion and erosion. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me and thought of how it had all begun, back when love was enough, when everything still smelled like promise. I met Lucas in 2005. Recife was younger then, or maybe I was. I worked at a flower shop near Boa Viagem, spending my days surrounded by the smell of damp soil and roses that wilted too soon. He used to come in on Fridays, pretending to buy flowers for his mother. I believed him, of course. He had that charm, the kind that folds around you like a warm blanket and only later reveals it was made of smoke. He said my smile reminded him of morning light. I laughed. No one had ever said something like that to me before. By the end of the month, I was sneaking him free tulips wrapped in paper just to see him come back. We got married in the summer of 2007. It was small, intimate, the kind of wedding people forget to photograph but never really forget. The ceremony was held in a community hall with borrowed chairs and string lights we hung ourselves. My dress was simple, sewn by my aunt in the heat of December. When he took my hand, I thought I had found my forever. For years, that belief carried me through everything. The bills, the exhaustion, the gray mornings when neither of us spoke but both of us stayed. We built our home brick by brick, painting the walls ourselves, burning our dinners, laughing about nothing. There were moments of real beauty. Sunday breakfasts, the smell of his cologne lingering on my pillow, the small, clumsy way he tried to fix things around the house and always made them worse. I thought imperfection meant humanity. I thought love was work, and I was never afraid of working. But somewhere around 2015, the air between us started to change. It wasn't sudden, not like in movies. It was gradual, subtle, like mold growing behind wallpaper. He stopped noticing my hair, stopped asking about my day. Our dinners became quieter, our bed colder. I tried to fix things. I cooked his favorite meals, left little notes in his jacket, reminded him of the beach where he first kissed me. He would smile and nod, but his eyes were already elsewhere, staring at something, or someone, I couldn't see. I remember one night, lying next to him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. I whispered, "Do you still love me?" He didn't answer right away. Then he turned and kissed my forehead, a kiss that felt more like farewell than affection. We stayed together anyway. People think endurance is love, but sometimes it's just fear. Fear of loneliness, of failure, of starting again when you're too tired to rebuild. I carried the weight of our life like a duty. When he lost his job in 2019, I took extra shifts at the shop. I sold arrangements for weddings and anniversaries, smiling while tying ribbons for other people's happiness. He spent his days at home, scrolling endlessly through his phone, saying he was looking for opportunities. I didn't question him. I told myself he needed space, that he was ashamed, that he'd find his way back. Love makes you blind to patterns. You confuse neglect for stress, distance for distraction. I remember the first time I caught him lying. It was something small, almost innocent. He said he'd gone to the hardware store, but the receipt in his pocket was for a cafe miles away. When I asked, he laughed it off. "You're overthinking again," he said, kissing my forehead. I wanted to believe him. The human heart is a strange thing. It prefers a comforting lie over an ugly truth. I went back to cooking dinner as if nothing had happened. But that night, as he showered, I took his phone from the counter. It was locked. He had never used a password before. That was when the first crack appeared. Months turned into years, and I began to collect the small betrayals like pressed flowers. Each one delicate, each one preserved. A sudden shower after work that made him late. A receipt from a hotel bar in Olinda. Lipstick that wasn't mine. The scent of jasmine on his clothes, though we never owned perfume like that. Still, I stayed. Because that's what wives do, isn't it? We stay until there's nothing left to stay for. I told myself I was strong, loyal, patient. But underneath, I was afraid. Afraid that if I left, everything I had built would crumble and I'd have nothing but memories of what could have been. When the pandemic came, we were forced into the same space again. I thought confinement might save us. Instead, it became a mirror I couldn't look away from. He spent hours in video calls with his clients. I knew better. I began to recognize the rhythm of his voice when he lied. Softer, slower, careful. By then, my heart had already gone quiet. I started keeping a journal, not of feelings, but of evidence. Times, places, details. Every entry was a seed of the woman I would become. The one who would one day sit in that cafe and watch another woman fall into her own web of deceit. It was in 2022, on our anniversary, that he forgot my gift entirely. No flowers, no dinner, not even a text. I remember sitting on the balcony, staring at the city lights, feeling the weight of invisible years pressing down. That was when something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for him to change. I stopped begging love to come back. I started thinking about justice. Not revenge, not yet, but balance. The world had tilted too far, and I wanted it straight again. I still wore my ring every day, even as the metal thinned from years of washing dishes and carrying groceries alone. I wore it like a reminder of the woman I used to be. The believer, the forgiver, the fool. I looked at that ring the night before I set the trap and realized it had lost its shine. Maybe so had I. But beneath the dullness, there was steel. And so, one quiet morning, I began to plan. Not out of hate, but out of exhaustion. The kind that comes when a heart has broken too many times and decided it won't break anymore. It was a Tuesday night in late October when the first real lie appeared, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Lies never introduce themselves. They arrive dressed as ordinary moments. The clock on the wall glowed 11:47. And Lucas's phone vibrated softly on the table beside the bed. He had fallen asleep already, one arm thrown over his head, his breathing heavy with the kind of peace only the unburdened seem to know. I glanced at the screen. A message preview flashed for a second before the light dimmed. "Still thinking about you," followed by a small red heart. The sound of my pulse filled the room. I reached for the phone instinctively, but he stirred, muttering something in his sleep. I froze. My heart was pounding so loud that I was sure it would wake him. For a long minute, I just sat there, staring at that black screen, the reflection of my own face distorted by the glass. When he turned to his side, I gently placed the phone back on the nightstand and lay still, eyes open until dawn. It's strange how quickly reality can split. That night, I began to live in two worlds, the one where everything was fine, and the one where the truth was waiting just beneath the surface, sharp and patient. The next morning, I asked him casually who had texted so late. He didn't even flinch. "Just a client from the firm," he said. "She's from the US, so time zones are weird." He smiled, sipping his coffee, and I watched the muscles around his mouth form that easy calm I once found so reassuring. He even winked. And I, God help me, laughed. It was easier that way, to laugh, to pretend I believed him, because believing him was safer than admitting that the foundation beneath me had started to rot. Weeks passed. The messages became more frequent. Late-night calls, brief smiles he couldn't hide, a sudden habit of taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I asked, he accused me of being paranoid. "You've changed, Anna," he said one night, raising his voice. "You see ghosts in every shadow." His anger was rehearsed, almost bored. He looked at me like I was a child misbehaving. That was the first time he made me feel small. The first time I apologized for something I hadn't done. I remember the smell of the kitchen that night. Burnt onions, the sourness of disappointment hanging in the air. He left his plate untouched and went to bed early. I sat at the table alone, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the rain against the window. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand an explanation, but instead, I cleaned up quietly, as if tidying away the evidence of my own humiliation. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't break you suddenly. It erodes you, grain by grain, until you start apologizing for existing. By December, the distance between us was a landscape. He worked late, came home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, and sometimes hummed songs I didn't know. I started to collect details like a detective in my own life. A new shirt I hadn't seen before. A restaurant charge on our credit card in a part of town we never visited. A hotel loyalty card tucked behind his driver's license. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I began to take notes. Dates, times, small clues that formed a mosaic of betrayal. Then came the second message. The one that shattered denial for good. It was a Saturday morning, bright and ordinary. I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the couch. He was in the shower. I glanced down. "Miss you already. Same bench, same coffee. Next week?" The words might as well have been a knife. I read them twice, 3 times, trying to convince myself they meant something else. But no, there was no misinterpretation, no innocent context. I felt my knees weaken. The world narrowed to a tunnel of sound. The water running, my heartbeat, the soft buzz of the phone still trembling in my hand. When he came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, he caught me holding the phone. The look on his face was instant. Shock, then irritation, then that cold, practiced calm. "Are you serious, Anna?" he said, voice low, dangerous. "You're invading my privacy now?" My privacy. The irony nearly made me laugh. I told him I'd seen the message. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Instead, he said, "You're imagining things again. She's just a friend." His tone was final, dismissive, as if the matter had already bored him. That night, he didn't come home. He sent a message around midnight. "Staying at the office. Big project. Don't wait up." I stared at the text until my vision blurred. The next morning, his pillow was still untouched. I made breakfast anyway, out of habit more than hope. The eggs burned. The coffee went cold. But I set the table for 2. That was the day I realized I wasn't living with a husband anymore. I was living with a ghost. In the weeks that followed, I began to change. Not outwardly, he would have noticed, but inside, something hardened. I started saving money quietly, moving small amounts from our shared account to mine. I began to watch, to listen, to study him the way he once studied me when he was in love. I learned the rhythm of his lies, the way he smiled before fabricating, the way his eyes shifted when he needed time to invent a story. Every gesture became a clue. Every word, a calculation. When January came, he bought a new phone. I didn't ask why. I already knew. But fate, or maybe irony, decided to play with him. One night, he left his old phone in the kitchen drawer. It still had his cloud account connected. I opened it, trembling, and there they were. Hundreds of messages, stretching back months. Pictures, dates, small promises whispered in digital ink. The name appeared like a curse I could finally read. Marina. I scrolled until I reached one photo. It was them together, sitting outside that same cafe, smiling under the orange light of the sunset. His hand rested on hers, casual and intimate, the same gesture he used to give me when crossing the street. The caption below the image said simply, "My safe place." That night, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a bone snapping underwater. I didn't cry. I just stared at the screen until dawn, then deleted nothing. Instead, I memorized every detail. Her face, the cafe name, the white bench behind them. I didn't know it yet, but that image would become the blueprint of my revenge. By the time I confronted him again, it wasn't about love anymore. It was about clarity, about seeing how deep the lie could go before it collapsed under its own weight. It was early February, a month after I found the messages, and I had rehearsed the confrontation so many times in my head that I almost sounded calm when I finally spoke. He was sitting on the couch, watching television, the flickering light painting his face in fragments. I stood near the window, arms crossed, trying to steady my voice. "Who is Marina?" I asked. He didn't even look away from the screen. "A client," he said. "I told you already." Then, with deliberate care, he lowered the volume and turned to face me. "Anna, this has to stop. You're obsessed. You need help." There it was. The tone. The one that turns guilt into accusation, betrayal into concern. He looked at me the way a doctor might look at a patient refusing medicine. His calmness was infuriating, a wall built out of practiced indifference. I wanted to scream, to show him the screenshots, the proof, the timestamps that spelled out his deceit. But he knew that. He was counting on it. Because when you're forced to defend what's true, you already sound hysterical. For weeks after that night, he shifted the narrative. Every argument became about my paranoia. He told friends I was jealous, unstable, going through a phase. He'd lower his voice when speaking to me in public, just enough to make me look like the one losing control. I began doubting my own memories. Had I misread something? Had I become that desperate woman who sees betrayal in every silence? That's what manipulation does. It rewrites your history, erases the border between reality and illusion, until you no longer trust your own mind. One evening, after dinner, he brought home flowers. Lilies, my favorite. The gesture was so sudden, so out of place, that it made me feel guilty for not feeling joy. He wrapped his arms around me, kissed my temple, and whispered, "Let's start over, okay?" His words melted like sugar in my ear, and for a second I almost believed him. Almost. Because I knew the smell on his jacket wasn't mine. I could tell Jasmine from any distance now. Then came the subtle punishments. He'd go silent for days if I questioned his schedule. He'd sigh dramatically when I tried to talk about us, like a teacher disappointed in a slow student. One morning, I found that he had deleted our anniversary photos from his social media. When I asked, he shrugged. "It's just the algorithm cleaning old stuff." The algorithm. A convenient ghost to blame. I started writing everything down in a small notebook I hid inside the lining of my purse. Times, dates, sentences. The way he'd squeeze my shoulder right after lying, as if to stamp the falsehood in place. The way his eyes softened when he needed me to forget. I stopped reacting to his provocations. Instead, I began studying him. Silence became my weapon. When he yelled, I just watched. When he lied, I nodded. When he blamed me, I apologized, even smiled. That's when he relaxed, when he thought he'd won. But what he didn't know was that I had stopped playing his game. I had started creating my own. He didn't notice when I changed the password to our joint account. He didn't notice when I redirected my salary to a new card under my maiden name. He didn't notice when I began spending my afternoons near the cafe where Marina worked, observing her habits like a biologist studying a species that had invaded her ecosystem. I watched her laugh with her friends, lean across tables, touch her hair when she thought someone was looking. She was beautiful, yes, but not exceptional. She was just younger, and maybe that was all it took. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. She was sitting outside, sipping her drink, scrolling on her phone. Then he arrived. My husband, my stranger, wearing the shirt I had ironed that morning. He kissed her on the cheek like it was routine. No hesitation, no guilt. I remember pressing my nails into my palm so hard that my skin broke. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I stood there behind the tinted window of my car, watching them. That moment didn't destroy me. It crystallized me. All the softness inside me turned to glass. I finally saw the truth for what it was, not for what I wanted it to be. That night I set the table as usual. I made pasta, poured wine, lit a candle. When he came home, late again, he looked surprised. "What's the occasion?" he asked, loosening his tie. I smiled. "Just us," I said. I wanted him to sit across from me one more time, to see the life we had built, the comfort he was so ready to throw away. We ate quietly. He told me about his day, about meaningless details. I nodded, pretending to listen. Inside, I was memorizing every sound, every gesture. It was the last dinner we would ever share as husband and wife. Afterward, he kissed my forehead and thanked me for being patient. That word stayed with me. Patient. As if my loyalty were a flaw, my endurance a sickness. He went to bed early. I stayed up, washing dishes one by one, letting the water run over my hands until it turned cold. When I turned off the faucet, the silence in the kitchen was absolute. It was in that silence that the plan began to form. Not from anger, but from exhaustion. A clean, sharp idea. Something that would make the world stop spinning around his lies. By the time dawn touched the window, I knew what I would do. Not yet the details. Those would come later. But the intention was there, solid and unshakable. I looked at him sleeping, his arm thrown across the bed, his breath steady and untroubled, and realized he would never feel remorse. People like him don't break. They bend reality until it serves them. And if the truth couldn't touch him, maybe humiliation could. I pulled the blanket over his shoulder and whispered into the darkness, "You'll learn what it feels like to be trapped." He didn't stir. He never heard me. It happened 2 weeks after that night of silence, the one where I whispered my promise into the dark. He came home earlier than usual, which was rare, and for a brief, stupid moment I thought maybe he had chosen me again. He stood at the door with that half smile that used to undo me, holding 2 plastic grocery bags like a man who still contributed. "We need to talk," he said, voice too casual, the way people speak when they already know the answer will hurt. We sat at the table, the same table where we once celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, new jobs, and now sat across from each other like strangers negotiating a ceasefire. He poured himself a drink, not offering me one, and began talking about money, about how he was in between clients, about how stressful things had been. Then he looked up and said, "I need you to do something for me." That tone again, half command, half confession. "There's a woman from work," he said carefully. "Marina, you know, the one you think I'm seeing. She's helping me with some documents for a deal. I need you to sign as my witness, just for paperwork, nothing serious." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, the audacity burning through the space between us. The liar had brought the lie home. He wasn't just hiding anymore. He wanted me to protect it. "You want me to sign something for her?" I asked quietly. He nodded, oblivious, confident in his performance. "It's just business. You always overthink." The paper came the next day. Legal jargon, official letterhead, a signature line for me. I could feel her name underneath the ink, even if it wasn't written there. My hand trembled as I signed, but I did it. Not because I believed him, because I wanted him to believe I did. That's what made it impossible. To sit there, pen in hand, pretending trust while every cell in my body screamed that I was signing my own erasure. That night I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. My reflection didn't blink. There were faint lines near my mouth I hadn't noticed before, the kind that come from holding back words for too long. I whispered, "You did what he asked," and the woman in the mirror didn't flinch. She just stared back, silent, patient, waiting for me to become something else. The following days felt rehearsed. He was affectionate again, lighter, humming when he shaved. He brought me coffee in bed once, as if to reward obedience. But behind that charm, there was calculation. He thought he had me back under his control, and in a way he did, but not the way he imagined. Because while he smiled, I was already tracing the shape of my revenge, invisible lines connecting every humiliation to the moment I would finally close the circle. Then, one evening, he crossed another boundary. We were having dinner when his phone rang, and he answered it right in front of me. His voice softened, that same tone I knew too well. I heard her name. He didn't even try to hide it. "Yeah, tomorrow works," he said, eyes fixed on me. "Same cafe." Then he hung up and went back to eating. I stared at him, trying to decide whether to laugh or cry. Instead, I said nothing. Silence had become my armor. Later that night, as he showered, I took his phone again. I knew he wouldn't have changed the password. He thought my curiosity had burned out. The messages were still there. "Can't wait to see you again. I miss your scent." She had sent a picture too, blurred and suggestive, taken in the very cafe where they met. And then his reply, casual and cruel. "Anna's becoming boring. Always complaining. You make me feel alive." I remember standing there, reading those words. The sound of the water running behind the door. The same man who once held my hand through miscarriages, who sat beside me in hospital waiting rooms, now spoke of me as a burden. I felt something snap. Not rage this time, but precision. Cold, clear precision. I began planning, slowly, methodically. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to see himself, naked, small, pitiful, and her too, the woman who thought she had won. I started visiting that cafe during the afternoons when he said he was working. I memorized every corner, every routine. The white bench outside where she liked to sit. The staff who knew her by name. The security cameras facing the wrong direction. It was during one of those visits that I met the janitor, an older man with a limp. We talked briefly about the bench. He told me it had been freshly repainted last month, but the coating was already peeling because of the humidity. I smiled and asked where they kept the supplies. He pointed to a small storage room behind the cafe, unlocked and rarely checked. Inside, I found the kind of chemicals used for cleaning and maintenance. Harmless in small doses, but together, capable of interesting things. I didn't touch anything that day. I just observed, learned, waited. At home, I practiced the expression I would wear when it happened. Neutral, detached, the face of a woman who had moved on. I rehearsed how I would walk away, how I would breathe, how I would not look back. The hardest part wasn't the plan itself. It was pretending everything was normal until it was time. He made it easier by underestimating me. He asked me one last impossible favor the night before it all unfolded. He said, "Could you iron my shirt for tomorrow? I have a meeting near the cafe." My hand hesitated for only a second before I smiled and said, "Of course." That was the moment I understood something cruel and freeing. The same hands that once built his life could also undo it. When he left that morning, humming to himself, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear into the gray horizon. The city outside was waking up, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I picked up my keys, slipped on my shoes, and whispered to the empty room, "Let's finish this." The day I discovered the full scope of it, the truth beyond suspicion, wasn't cinematic. There was no thunder, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet, cruel simplicity. It was a Wednesday afternoon, Recife once again wrapped in that damp heat that makes even the air feel heavy. I had followed him, of course, not out of impulse but precision. I had planned every step. I left home 20 minutes after he did, took the longer route, parked 2 blocks away from the cafe, and watched from behind tinted glass. I had no intention of being seen. I only wanted confirmation, the kind that doesn't leave room for denial anymore. He arrived first, wearing the same blue shirt I had ironed, the one that still carried traces of my perfume. I watched him check his watch, that subtle gesture he used when pretending to be patient. Then she appeared. Marina, younger than me by at least 15 years, maybe more. She wore confidence like jewelry. She didn't look around nervously. She walked straight to him as if she belonged to that space. When he saw her, his face changed in a way I hadn't seen in years. A softness, a spark, the kind of expression that used to be mine. They sat at the white bench outside the cafe, talking, laughing, touching each other's hands as if the world had shrunk to fit them. I recognized the way he leaned in to listen, the little tilt of his head. It was the same gesture he used when he first met me at the flower shop. I had once mistaken that focus for love. Now I understood it was conquest. Lucas didn't love women. He collected them. He loved the reflection of himself that he saw in their eyes. At some point, she took a photo of them together. He posed willingly, his arm resting on the back of the bench, his smile easy and unguarded. I imagined the caption already written in her mind, something romantic and vague. Maybe, where I belong. It was that arrogance that finally killed whatever remained of my hesitation. I stepped out of the car only after he left. I watched him disappear into traffic, oblivious to the fact that the woman he had betrayed was watching from the edge of the same world he had built with lies. Marina stayed behind, scrolling through her phone, smiling at the screen. I walked past her, close enough to catch a whiff of her perfume. Sweet, artificial, too young for her age. It clung to the air like cheap sugar. I didn't say a word. I just walked inside the cafe, ordered a coffee, and sat near the window, watching her reflection in the glass. The barista, a kind girl with tired eyes, recognized her immediately. "That one comes here every week," she said, nodding subtly toward Marina. "Always alone for a while. Then the guy joins her. They think nobody notices." She laughed softly. "People always think they're invisible when they're happy." I smiled politely, sipping my coffee, my mind racing. That was the confirmation I needed. I didn't have to imagine anymore. I had witnesses. I had patterns. I had her schedule. When Marina left, I followed her at a distance. She walked with that careless rhythm of someone who has never had to look over her shoulder. I followed her for several blocks until she reached a small apartment building near the water. Pink walls, iron gate, a security guard who barely looked up from his phone. She entered, disappeared behind a wooden door marked 302, and that was it. I turned back, walking slowly, memorizing the route. I didn't want revenge in a rush. I wanted precision. That night, Lucas came home as if nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek distractedly and went straight to the shower. I could smell her perfume on him. Barely, but enough. He came out humming, toweling his hair, and asked what was for dinner. I said, "Fish." And he nodded, pleased. We sat together like any other night, and he told me about meetings, about projects, about things that didn't exist. I listened. Every word was a lie. Every smile was a performance. But for the first time, I wasn't the audience. I was the director. When he went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark, staring at the table where I had once dreamed of growing old together. My phone buzzed. An alert from the GPS tracker I had placed under his car 2 days earlier. He was supposed to be asleep. The signal showed movement, then a stop, near the same cafe. My fingers tightened around the glass. I realized then that this affair wasn't just routine, it was ritual. A place where he could pretend to be a better version of himself. I would take that from him too. The next day, I returned to the cafe before either of them. The janitor was there, sweeping near the bench. I greeted him again, casual, friendly. He told me he'd be gone for an hour to pick up supplies. When he left, I opened the small maintenance cabinet and pulled out the materials I had researched for weeks. The mixture was simple: a clear, tacky compound used for fixing cracks in outdoor furniture. Perfectly safe on skin, but nearly impossible to remove without solvent. It wasn't cruelty, it was symbolism. She would be stuck in the very place where she had stolen my peace. I worked quickly, coating the underside of the bench with the solution. It would take about 30 minutes to dry to an invisible film, sticky enough to hold, but not harm. I wiped my gloves clean, closed the cabinet, and returned inside for a coffee. My hands shook only once when the cup touched my lips. Then, hours later, I watched it happen. The culmination of every silent tear, every sleepless night. She arrived early, wearing a white dress this time, her hair tied up. She checked her reflection in the glass, smiled, and sat, exactly where I had expected. The moment her skin touched the surface, she didn't notice. Not at first, but soon she shifted, frowned, tried to stand, and couldn't. The realization spread across her face like a shadow, slow and dawning. I watched from inside, my heart hammering but my face expressionless. People turned, confused, whispering. The sound of her voice, panicked, embarrassed, cut through the chatter. "I can't get up," she said, laughing nervously. Then louder, "I can't move." The barista rushed out to help. The more they pulled, the more the fabric clung. The perfect irony. I didn't move. I finished my coffee, left money on the table, and walked out through the back door. I could hear the commotion growing behind me, the rising pitch of her voice, the metallic scrape of chairs as people gathered. I didn't look back. For once, the past could stay exactly where it belonged, behind me. When I reached the corner, I turned off my phone's tracker, deleting every trace of the plan. The sun was setting, the sky bruised in orange and pink. I felt neither joy nor guilt, just an odd kind of stillness. It was over. But as I walked home, the silence felt heavier than before. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't erase betrayal. It only mirrors it back. And as I stepped into the quiet of our apartment, I knew that what I had discovered was not just his deceit. It was the part of me that had learned to survive by becoming like him. It started months before that afternoon in silence and calculation. Long before the bench, long before the glue, long before I saw her face reflected in the cafe window. What people call revenge is rarely a single act. It's a slow engineering of justice that begins the moment love dies. The planning wasn't spontaneous. It was deliberate, patient, a ritual of control in a life where I had lost it all. Every detail was born from observation. I learned their routine like a religion. Wednesdays and Fridays between 3:30 and 5 p.m., same cafe, same white bench, same seat. He always arrived 20 minutes after her. He always parked in the same spot across the street. The predictability disgusted me. And yet, it was also comforting. Patterns are the language of liars. Once you learn them, they become maps to their downfall. I started documenting everything, not with emotion but with precision. Dates, angles, timing, even the light. I took photos from across the street, pretending to check messages. I saved them in a hidden folder named House Repairs. I rehearsed my steps in my head, how long it would take the adhesive to cure, how long she usually sat before he arrived, how far the nearest water source was in case someone tried to help her. I wasn't improvising. I was orchestrating. But before any of that, I needed the substance. I spent weeks researching without raising suspicion. My husband worked in construction once. I knew the kind of compounds used for sealing cracks and insulating outdoor materials. The trick was finding something non-toxic but stubborn, something that wouldn't hurt her but would bind fabric to surface like a vow. I found it in a hardware store near the docks, sold in unlabeled containers for marine repairs. The man at the counter didn't ask questions. I paid in cash. I told him it was for garden furniture. At night, I tested it on scraps of cloth in our backyard, the same place where we used to barbecue with friends who no longer called. The crickets hummed around me as I worked, methodical, calm. The substance dried to a clear gloss, invisible under most light. When I pressed the fabric down and waited, it adhered completely. I remember pulling, harder and harder until the fibers tore. That was the sound I carried with me, not of vengeance, but of inevitability. Meanwhile, he kept lying. He thought I was tired, defeated. He began leaving his phone unlocked again, a performance of fake transparency. I didn't even look anymore. I didn't need proof. Proof is for the hopeful. I was past that. Instead, I focused on his schedule, his tone, his careless trust. He told me about his client meetings, his late lunches, his networking events. I smiled, nodded, ironed his shirts, made dinner. The perfect wife, silent, invisible, sharpening her blade behind a smile. One evening, while cleaning, I found a necklace in his drawer. Gold, delicate, new. It wasn't mine. I stared at it for a long time, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the metal. I didn't cry. I simply closed the drawer, locked the memory away, and whispered to the empty air, "You've given me all I need." That was the night I finalized the plan. I would act on a Friday, the day before her weekend trips that she bragged about online. I had found her social media by then, a mosaic of curated happiness. She posted everything: the books she read, the meals she ate, the bench where she waited for someone special. I studied her captions like they were confessions. I even knew what color she would wear. White. Always white. Innocence as a costume. The morning of the trap was unusually bright, the kind of cruel sunlight that makes everything look too real. I woke up before dawn, dressed simply, tied my hair back, and left the house while he was still asleep. I carried the small jar of mixture in a reusable shopping bag, next to a water bottle and gloves. At the cafe, I greeted the janitor with a smile. He trusted me by then. I had brought him pastries once, asked about his grandchildren. I had built my invisibility brick by brick. When he went to the back for cleaning supplies, I approached the bench. My heart was steady. The city moved around me, indifferent. Joggers passing by, traffic humming, pigeons fluttering near the curb. I uncapped the jar, the faint chemical scent rising in the morning heat, and applied the substance along the middle of the seat. A thin layer, smooth and perfect. I wiped the edges clean, placed a small newspaper on top, and sat down briefly to test it. When I stood, nothing visible remained but the faintest sheen, like sunlight on water. I left quietly, my pulse calm, my breath measured. From the cafe window across the street, I watched the bench for half an hour. No one noticed anything. The world was ordinary, just as I wanted it to be. By the time Marina arrived, everything was in motion. She looked radiant, excited, her phone in hand. She didn't even hesitate before sitting down, crossing her legs, brushing imaginary dust from her skirt. The trap didn't spring immediately. It was patient, just like I had been. The adhesive needed warmth to activate. The heat from her body, the sun overhead, time, all of it working together like silent accomplices. While she sat there, scrolling through her messages, waiting for him, I thought about how many hours of my life I had wasted doing the same, waiting for him to call, to explain, to love me properly. I realized that this was never about her. Not really. It was about me reclaiming something that had been stolen piece by piece. My dignity, my agency, my voice. When she finally tried to stand, I saw it in her posture first. The disbelief, the confusion. She pressed her hands against the bench, shifted, tried again. Then panic. A hand to her mouth, a sharp laugh to disguise fear. People around began to notice. The barista opened the door, startled. I finished my coffee, left a few bills under the saucer, and walked out through the back alley, sunlight cutting sharp lines across the pavement. Each step away felt heavier and lighter at once. I didn't look back. The sounds behind me, her voice rising, the murmurs, the scrape of shoes on pavement, grew faint, like an echo inside water. When I turned the corner, the wind carried the smell of the sea, clean and indifferent. I breathed in, slow and deep, and whispered, "Now you know." The trap had been more than physical. It was symbolic. He had built a prison of deceit. I had built one of truth. He trapped me for years with promises. I had trapped his illusion in daylight, for everyone to see. But as I walked home, the silence grew thicker. The air inside the house felt different, heavier, haunted by all the versions of myself I had to kill to become the woman who could do this. I looked at our wedding photo on the shelf, two smiling strangers who believed in forever, and turned it face down. That night, I slept without dreams for the first time in years. The moment she sat down, time broke apart. I remember the way her dress folded neatly beneath her, how her hands smoothed the fabric in that absent-minded gesture all confident women seem to have. It was almost elegant, the way she crossed her legs, how she looked around with that calm certainty that comes from believing the world belongs to you. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The cafe hummed with normal life, spoons clinking against porcelain, the low murmur of conversations, a bus hissing to a stop outside. Then, slowly, the air began to change. I watched from inside, behind the glass, my reflection hovering over hers like a ghost. She checked her phone again, smiled at a message, probably from him, and tilted her head, the earrings catching the light. I could almost hear her laugh, that soft melodic tone that once belonged to me. Then, as the seconds passed, I saw the first shift in her posture. A subtle frown, the smallest twitch in her mouth. Her body stiffened, her hands pressed slightly against the bench, testing. Another second, and she tried again, harder this time. Her fingers gripped the edge, her shoulders flexed, but she didn't move. The adhesive had activated perfectly, invisible and relentless. I could see the confusion building behind her smile, like a storm hidden behind sunlight. She looked down, checking her dress, then tried to stand once more. Her eyes widened. She laughed nervously, trying to make it seem light. A couple nearby turned their heads. A waiter paused mid-step. The sound of her forced giggle cracked at the edges. I could read the thought forming in her mind. This isn't possible. I took a sip of my coffee. It was lukewarm now, bitter, but I swallowed it anyway. My hands didn't shake. Inside me there was no joy, no guilt, just a strange, hollow calm. Watching her struggle felt surreal, like observing a dream from the outside. I had imagined this scene countless times, her arrogance dissolving, her control slipping, her perfect image fracturing under the weight of embarrassment. And yet, when it happened, I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt too much, too deeply, all at once. She called for help. Her voice rose, half laughing, half desperate. "Excuse me, I can't get up." A few people looked over, amused. The barista hurried outside, wiping her hands on her apron. I saw her kneel beside Marina, tug gently at her arm, then try harder. The fabric wouldn't budge. I could see their confusion turn to panic. Another customer came out to help, a man from a nearby table. The air outside thickened with curiosity. Cameras started to lift. Phones began recording. I knew they would. No one can resist a spectacle. Through the glass, I watched as her confidence crumbled in real time. Her laughter became pleading, her gestures clumsy, frantic. She pulled, twisted, cursed. The bench held her fast. I caught a glimpse of her reflection. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes darting around for rescue. The crowd was murmuring now, their faces split between concern and amusement. Someone suggested calling maintenance. Someone else offered water. I wondered what story she would tell when they finally freed her. Maybe she'd say it was an accident. Maybe she'd blame the bench, the paint, the weather. But deep inside, she would know. I stood, placed my money on the table, and walked to the door. No one noticed me. I had become part of the furniture, another passerby, another woman in the crowd. I opened the door and stepped outside, the sound of her struggling fading into the street's rhythm. Engines, horns, waves against the shore. I didn't look at her directly. I didn't need to. I could feel the chaos radiating from her like heat. Halfway down the block, I glanced at the cafe's reflection in a shop window. The small crowd had grown. The bench glimmered faintly under the sun, its pristine white now smeared with panic. She was still there, surrounded, helpless. I thought about all the nights I had felt exactly like that, trapped, exposed, powerless while he lied with a calm smile. I thought about the times I begged him to look at me, to tell me the truth, and how he just walked away. Maybe now he would understand if he saw her there. Maybe not. Men like him rarely see beyond themselves. The irony didn't escape me. I had spent years being invisible, and now, in revenge, I remained invisible by choice. No one knew. No one saw the architect of the humiliation walk away. I blended into the afternoon crowd, carrying the calm of completion. There was no triumph in me, only a quiet release, like a wound finally closing. I took the long way home. The streets shimmered in the heat. I passed by children playing soccer in the dust, by vendors calling out their offers, by an old couple holding hands. The world kept moving, indifferent. The ocean smell drifted through the air, mixing salt and decay, and I realized that what I felt wasn't victory. It was absence, a hollow where pain used to live. When I reached the house, everything was as I had left it. His shoes by the door, his jacket on the chair, the silence of ordinary life. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at myself. For the first time in years, I didn't look like a victim. I looked like someone emptied out and rebuilt from ashes. My eyes were sharper, older. I touched my reflection, tracing the faint lines around my mouth. They didn't bother me anymore. They were proof that I had endured. Later, I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the ceiling fan spin, its rhythm steady, almost hypnotic. I thought about the bench, about Marina, about how she must be crying by now, scrubbing her skin, wondering if someone had done it on purpose. Maybe she would tell him. Maybe he would rush to her, comforting her, promising it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd even suspect me, but he'd never be sure. That uncertainty would be my gift to him. I closed my eyes and exhaled, long and slow. For the first time, I didn't dream of him. I didn't dream of her. I dreamed of silence, wide, endless, and clean. The news spread faster than I expected. By the next morning, the incident had already turned into a local spectacle. "Woman gets stuck to bench at cafe in Boa Viajam," the headline read, accompanied by grainy cell phone videos and a dozen laughing comments. People treated it like a joke, something to fill the emptiness of their feed. They didn't know the story behind the glue, the years of silence, the endless small deaths that came before it. They saw only the surface, the way they always do. I found the video by accident while scrolling through the news on my phone. The thumbnail froze her mid-expression, her face caught between horror and disbelief, her mouth half open as if still trying to find the right excuse. Behind her, people laughed. Someone had added cheerful music over the clip. I watched it twice, then put the phone down. It didn't make me laugh. It didn't even make me proud. It made me tired. When Lucas came home that evening, his face was pale. He dropped his keys on the counter, looked at me, and said, "Did you see that thing on the news?" I nodded. He hesitated. "It's her," he said finally, almost whispering. "Marina." His voice cracked on her name. "Can you believe it? Someone must have done it to her. Some crazy person." I looked at him for a long moment, studying the tremor in his hand, the sweat along his collar. "Crazy," I repeated softly. "People can be unpredictable." He searched my eyes, maybe for guilt, maybe for relief, but all he found was calm. I turned away, pretending to focus on dinner. "I'm making fish," I said, my voice steady. "You like fish, don't you?" He didn't answer right away. He stood behind me, silent, the weight of his stare heavy on my neck. Finally, he muttered, "You seem different lately." I smiled faintly, keeping my back to him. Maybe I finally learned something. We ate in silence. Every clink of cutlery was a memory. The way he chewed slowly, distracted, glancing at his phone. The way I no longer cared where his eyes went. After dinner, he went to the bedroom to shower. I stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes one by one. Outside, the city glowed dimly, the hum of traffic distant and soothing. Later that night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him on the phone. His voice was low, shaken. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I can't believe that happened to you. I don't know who would do something like that. Are you okay?" Silence. Then, Of course I believe you. Another pause. No, she doesn't know anything. I smiled into the dark. No, she didn't know. Not for certain. Not yet. That was the beauty of it. Not the act, but the uncertainty. It would live in their minds like a parasite. Every time they met, every time he looked at her, he would wonder, did she do it? Did she find out everything? Was it a coincidence? Or was it punishment? That doubt would erode whatever illusion they tried to rebuild. I didn't need to say a word. My silence had become its own kind of weapon. The following days passed quietly. He became restless, distracted. He jumped whenever his phone buzzed, avoided my gaze during breakfast. Sometimes I caught him watching me from the hallway, as if trying to read an invisible confession written across my face. But I gave him nothing, only calm, only routine. One evening, he came home late again. I didn't ask where he'd been. He stood by the door, hesitant. She doesn't want to see me anymore, he said finally, voice trembling. She's embarrassed. People at the cafe recognized her. Someone filmed everything. It's everywhere. He rubbed his temples, breathing hard. She said she feels cursed. I turned from the stove and met his eyes. Maybe it's karma, I said simply. His mouth opened, then closed again. He didn't argue. He just sat down, buried his face in his hands. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Not for losing her, but for finally seeing the kind of pain he had inflicted for years reflected back at him. The weight of exposure, the taste of humiliation. He was tasting his own medicine now, and it was bitter. He didn't touch his dinner. That night, I heard him crying quietly in the bathroom. Not loudly, just the kind of broken sound people make when they realize control has left them. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange calmness settle inside me. It wasn't satisfaction. It was clarity. He had always been the puppeteer, but the strings were now in my hands. The next morning, he left early. When I came downstairs, his car keys were gone, and so was his toothbrush. On the kitchen table, a folded note. I need time to think. I laughed softly. Time was the one thing he never gave me, and now it was his only escape. Days turned into weeks. The house felt different, lighter, emptier, freer. I rearranged the furniture, took down our wedding photo, and threw away his clothes. The scent of him slowly faded, replaced by the clean smell of lemon and quiet. Sometimes I'd hear news from neighbors that they had seen him somewhere, looking lost, older, thinner. Once, I saw a message from an unknown number on my phone. I deserve this, don't I? I didn't reply. Some questions don't need answers. But peace is never pure. At night, the quiet grew heavy. There were moments when guilt crept in, not for what I'd done, but for what I had become. I thought of Marina, how she must have felt sitting there, trapped in front of strangers, her laughter turning to shame. I imagined her scrubbing her skin, crying in her car, afraid to go outside. Maybe she didn't deserve the full weight of it. But then I remembered her smile, her certainty, her hand on my husband's arm, and the guilt faded. One evening, I walked past the cafe again. The bench had been replaced. The old one, my bench, was gone. The new one gleamed under the streetlight, spotless, untouched. I stood there for a moment, watching strangers sit where she once couldn't stand. They didn't know its history. They never would. As I walked away, I realized that the bench wasn't just for her. It was for me. It was where I had left my pain, my loyalty, my illusions. It had held everything I could no longer carry. And now, finally, it was empty. The house is quiet now, the kind of silence that doesn't ache but hums softly, like the ocean after a storm. It's been 3 months since Lucas left, and I've learned to live with the echo of his absence. The wardrobe that once held his clothes now smells of lavender. The drawers are filled with neatly folded sheets and small comforts that belong only to me. The mirror in the hallway, the same one that used to reflect us together before dinners and weddings and funerals, now holds just one face, mine. And in that reflection, I no longer see the woman who waited, the woman who forgave, or the woman who begged. I see something quieter, stronger, maybe even dangerous in its stillness. Sometimes I catch myself studying my own eyes, wondering how much of me died and how much was reborn. There's no triumph there, no pride, just awareness. I think about Marina sometimes, not with hatred, but with a detached curiosity. Whether she moved away, whether she told anyone the truth, whether she suspects me when she closes her eyes at night. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. It doesn't matter. The punishment was never about her. It was about me reclaiming the version of myself that stopped existing when I believed his lies. Every morning, I open the curtains and let the sunlight fill the room. I water the plants that used to wilt under the weight of our neglect. I play old songs on the radio, the ones he hated because they reminded him of the years when we still had dreams. I've started walking by the sea again, the same path we once took when we were young and foolish. The waves still break the same way, endless, indifferent, honest. It's strange how the world continues so easily after your private war ends. One morning I saw him again, by accident or fate. He was sitting alone at a different cafe across town, hunched over a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. His hair was grayer, his eyes hollow. There was a tiredness in him I had never seen before, the kind that comes when a man runs out of people to lie to. For a second, I wanted to walk up to him, to tell him that I had forgiven him, not out of kindness, but because he no longer had power over me. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching from a distance, invisible again by choice. Then I turned away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the mirror again, the same mirror that had witnessed everything: love, betrayal, rage, and redemption. I studied my reflection in the dim light, the lines around my mouth, the faint silver in my hair. I traced my fingers along my jaw, feeling the pulse beneath my skin, proof that I was still alive, still here. For so long, I thought survival meant staying. Now I understand that survival sometimes means leaving, even when your feet never move. There's a saying I once read somewhere, that revenge is a confession of pain. Maybe it's true. Maybe everything I did was just a desperate attempt to make him feel what I felt. But when I look at myself now, I realize I don't need him to understand anymore. His punishment isn't what happened at the cafe. His punishment is waking up every morning knowing he was the villain in a story that will never be told in his favor. My revenge was never about pain. It was about freedom. Sometimes, when the wind passes through the window at night, carrying the scent of salt and rain, I think of that day at the bench, not with regret, but with a kind of peace. There's a cruel symmetry in the world. Everything we do circles back, one way or another. He trapped me for years in a lie, and I answered with truth disguised as silence. He taught me that love can be a cage, and I showed him that it can also be a mirror. I've learned that healing isn't soft. It's not gentle or graceful. It's violent in its honesty. It tears away the parts of you that begged for attention and replaces them with solitude and clarity. Healing is the sound of a lock clicking from the inside. Sometimes I still dream of the sea. In the dream, I'm standing at the shore, watching waves erase footprints one by one. I know they're mine, but I don't run after them. I let them fade. The water is cold, but clean. I breathe in the salt and the wind and the quiet. When I wake, there's no fear left, only the certainty that everything has its place, even pain, even betrayal, even vengeance. Before going to bed tonight, I walked to the mirror one last time. My reflection stared back, calm and unafraid. I whispered, "You did what you had to do." And for the first time, I believed it. Then I turned off the light, leaving the house in silence. The same silence that used to suffocate me now feels like freedom. Outside, the city sleeps, unaware of the woman who finally stopped being a ghost in her own story. And somewhere, miles away, on a replaced white bench by the sea, the sun will rise again, clean, unaware, just like me.